Hello again, everyone. My name is Doug Cook. I use he, him pronouns, and I live on what once was Pawtucket land, currently known as South Hamilton, Massachusetts, in the Ipswich River watershed. I'm the Education Events Coordinator for NOFA Mass, and I'll be your host for tonight. With me tonight is Rafi, who is an intern and studies at Greenfield Community College. Thanks for joining us, Rafi, and for helping to organize questions and do some of those background things that we like to do during our events. As well, we want to make sure to thank all of the NOFAMAS staff and board members who have made this event possible. With me tonight is Monique Bosch, and we are going to be understanding living soil tonight. We want to take some time now to thank our sponsors, Chelsea Green Publishing, an employee-owned company which brings in-depth practical content about organic gardening and more to life with books, ebooks, and audiobooks. Go to chelseagreen.com and enter code PWEB35 at checkout to receive a special NOFAMAS Resilient Garden Series discount on your next print book purchase. Chelsea Green Publishing, cultivating change from the ground up. As well, Ward's Nursery. They pride themselves on being a leader in offering horticultural products you can count on, knowledgeable staff you can trust, and friendly customer service. Ward's Nursery and Garden Center, where gardeners grow, located in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And Neptune's Harvest produces products from the ocean to set your plants in motion. You can enter code NOFA10 at checkout for a 10% discount off of your order between March 9th and April 9th this year at neptunesharvest.com. And of course, most importantly, we want to thank you, the viewers and listeners, especially our members who make our education and advocacy work possible. Please consider becoming a member and or making a donation to support our important work. Before we begin, we like to use this map to give everyone an opportunity to identify the location that they're coming from and learn more about the indigenous people who once resided and managed the land where you live, and also learn about their present day political structures, issues, and goals. We suggest you learn more about the ongoing history of Black exclusion from property and farmland ownership as well. Please consider making solidarity work with local Black and Indigenous groups a part of your environmental and land-based work. We owe so much of what we know about how to grow food and manage land in a way that is regenerative and ecologically responsible, not only to the people who are here before colonization, but the people who were brought to the United States as slaves. Rather than erase them, we should honor and support and seek justice for their descendants who have survived centuries of oppression and white supremacy. And we'll drop some more links in the chat for organizations you can learn more about, follow, and support. And so with that, I want to say thank you very much for sharing this space with us tonight, and to take a moment to all focus on your breath and connect to the place that you're in at the moment and your body. And it is my great pleasure to now be able to introduce our presenter, Monique. Monique has built over 40 edible school and community gardens and farms around New England, and including a 2-acre urban farm in Bridgeport, Connecticut. These days, Monique works as a soil health technician for Connecticut NOFA, teaches how to grow your own food, and runs a worm composting business with her son, Justin. Okay. Thanks for joining us, Monique.
All right, thanks for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everybody. So without further ado, let's see some more microbes, right? Well, there is other things that I'm going to be sharing with you. So bear with me. I'm going to just share my PowerPoint presentation. Play from the start so everyone can see healthy soil, healthy you. That would be yes. Okay, so we're going to talk about healthy soil and what is healthy soil. And of course, healthy soil is living soil, as we will find out. This is a true hero of mine, Vandana Shiva, who talks about in nature's economy, the currency is not money, it is life. And what does that mean? And she talks about the governments not able to solve climate, health, and democracy crisis. It's really regenerative agriculture that has the answers. And we'll touch base with her a little later in the presentation. So what we're finding with nutrition in the food we're eating is there's a huge variation in what is in the food, and it seems to be depending on how we are growing that food. So what we're finding over the last 50 years, there's been an incredible decline in the nutrition in the food we're eating. And we're also finding that, here's some studies from 1950, 1999, there's been a huge decline in all of the minerals and vitamins in our food. And if you look at the difference between organic and conventional, it really is shocking to see how many more beans you'd need to eat to get the same amount of nutrients than you would if you're eating organic. So I don't know if you remember, but way back in 2015, it was declared the International Year of the Soil, with the definition by the UN being that healthy soil is a living dynamic ecosystem, teeming with microscopic and larger organisms. And then we really started talking about what is that living soil? And of course, we were doing work with microscopy and looking at the microbes in the soil, which we're going to be exploring here. At the same time, came out that we really have, if we continue the way we're going with soil degradation, only 60 years of farming left. I guess I would make it now 53 years. And no, sorry, I'm not doing the math. But anyway, that was back in 2015. 54 years left, that is not a lot of time. But what we're finding is there are ways to build soil. So here we have conventional soil versus regenerative ag. Now, I showed you this slide for a reason. This was actually taken in Mexico and in 2020 and on a farm growing corn. Well, just recently, Mexico decided to ban glyphosate and also GMOs because they were worried. There's so much corn being consumed in Mexico. They were worried that their own native seeds would be contaminated if they allowed the GMO corn to come in. So I thought that was a really cool story to see how we are changing and that there are ways to bring regenerative agriculture, save the seeds. And that brings me to my hero here, Vandana Shiva. And this is actually at the Hickory's farm in Ridgefield, Connecticut last summer, I guess 2019 now. And she says, and her wonderful group, Navdanya, she was fighting Monsanto to save the local seeds in India. And so she talks about food not being a commodity, but really life, health, and that growing food ecologically is really what we are doing here with regenerative ag. And we're going to talk more about that. Then, surprise, surprise, new Massachusetts regulations are going to limit the pesticide use in Massachusetts. So there's a wonderful article in The Sun about that, very recent. And just to the bottom line of that, and you'll have access to this to read it later, but a big thank you to Martin Dagoberto from NOFA Mass for organizing and helping to promote the Healthy Soil Bill and what that means to Massachusetts and all other states. All right, so I digress there, but hopefully for good reason. This is a wonderful book, Secrets of Fertile Soil. It really is, from a grower's perspective, soil fertility correlates with the ability of the plant to get its nutritional needs met and to flourish. And so again, talking about a vital living ecosystem. Now, here's an example from NRDC where they talk about the difference between dead and living soil. And I'm just going to flip through that very quickly. Again, microorganisms being key to indicating living soil. This is an excellent book, which is available online from NOFA Mass, The Carbon Sequestration Garden. It really is full of fascinating reading and this wonderful quote: "Whatever takes place each day in the world beneath our feet has wide-ranging influences on some of the great issues of our time: pollution, nutrition, and health. global warming, and preservation of biodiversity. So ways to build up that soil, life in the soil and sequester carbon really quickly is to minimize or avoid chemical, physical, and biological stressors. So obviously no artificial pesticides and fertilizers for those reasons. And also physical tilling, for example. This Zach Bush, if you want to look him up, he's got some great webinars available online. He talks about road tilling being equally damaging to the soil as spraying chemicals. He also said that one application of chemical fertilizer can kill half the life in the soil. Staggering statistic there. So other ways to build up soil and sequester carbon. Well, plant diversity as much as possible. And keeping something living in the ground year round, everything from perennials to ground covers to cover crops, intercropping, which we'll talk about. Again, if you can see the soil, you know that it's losing carbon, losing life and vitality. So you really want to make sure that there's as much of the year as possible that you are covering the soil with living plants, and if not, some kind of cover in form of mulch or whatever you have. But perennials really are a wonderful way of covering the soil. Kiss the Ground. I don't know if everyone's seen that movie. It's available on Netflix. I highly recommend it. It's all about life in the soil, funny enough. And it started with this book. And so I'm going to flip through that. Another wonderful resource, the Bionutrient Food Association. They also have a lot of webinars and interesting material for you to look at. And a wonderful quote, the more we are in harmony with nature, the more successful we can be in growing food. And that is true. So this is what I usually put my hands up and explain, as Bionutrient does so well. In nature, the plants are taking in the sunlight and converting that sunlight into sugars or exudates. And then what they do is up to 50%, sometimes 70% of those exudates go out through the roots. And that is feeding the microorganisms, such as, which we'll see, bacteria and fungi. And then in exchange, these microbes use that sugar to reproduce, access minerals out of the soil, and then these minerals are digested and fed back to the plant. And that's what we're learning more and more about, this symbiotic relationship between the plant and the microbes, the living micro system, if you will, that is in the ground. I did study under Dr. Elaine Ingham, and this is actually available as a PDF on, you can look that up online. She had this wonderful thing, because of sugar, she puts cakes and cookies coming out of the roots. And the microbes also will protect the root systems from diseases and pests and enhance nutrient cycling. So building soil structure. So we're going to get into that. I love this nematode. Apparently microbiologists estimate there's like 1.5 billion, million species of soil fungi and 3 million species of bacteria. Agricultural soils that are depleted have no more than, say, 5,000 species present. So here's that soil food web, which, as Gabe Brown will tell us, is very much alive. And there are more microorganisms in a teaspoon of healthy soil than there are people on Earth. And so we're going to take a look, and you've seen some of these characters already, the nematodes and the microarthropods and the protozoa. So let's take a look at what they look like. So here are examples of bacteria and fungi in the soil. This is zoomed in 400 times. So now let's see if it's going to play this. This is going to be bacteria. All right, so these are the smallest and most plentiful microbes, and they benefit plant by increasing nutrient availability. Chemical fertilizers and pesticides limit bacterial numbers, and they also stop aggregates from being formed. So you can see there's no structure in the soil. Tilling, which is we have here, it leads to bacterial dominant soil. So what we really want, when you look at this undisturbed soil, you can see the amount of aggregates there are there. And that gives the soil structure, allows the nutrients and water to hold on and stay around to feed the plants. All right, so here we have the next thing, fungal hyphae. And I'm just putting this in as new video, so I'm trying this for the first time so that you're not just looking at stills. Okay, we're going to play this. This is fungal hyphae. It grows in these long thread-like structures in the soil. And you can see here the untilled garden soil. So when you reduce the tillage, it allows the fungi to flourish. So these are all, of course, I've shaken up the test tube, but you can see these pieces of fungi everywhere. They've been broken up, but you can imagine what they used to be. This is actually an untilled field growing, I think it's ginger at Assawaga Farm, right on the border of Connecticut and Massachusetts. So this is a fungal dominant soil. You usually find this in woodlands and around mature trees. And what you can do, adding this fungal dominant soil to compost or compost tea in this case, can help inoculate soils, leading to a balanced fungi bacteria ratio, selecting for the crops we want to grow. All right, so remember I was talking about the plants we want to grow? This is fungal bacterial ratio. So again, when we're talking about disturbing the soil, bare soil, soil that have had chemicals, a lot of the soil I look at, in fact, is pretty much 100% bacterial. And so what you're selecting for there is weeds. So anytime you disturb the soil, guess what comes up? Weeds, because it's bacterial dominant. If you go into an old growth forest, you're going to find that it's all fungal, as that image showed you earlier. And that's for when you're growing trees. And again, the more you move into away from the forest, the more you start getting more bacterial. And what we want to grow in here is that balance between fungal and bacterial. So we'll talk further about that. So again, different plants need different types of microbes in the soil. So things like brassicas can handle a more bacterial soil. And then as you move into the woodland edge, things like strawberries and berries and things like that all want to have a fungal dominant soil. All right, here's another fun video. These are protozoa. And this first one you're looking at, that is a flagellate. So protozoa are single cell predators. And this is actually a testate amoeba here. And this is another type of amoeba. These guys feed on bacteria, fungi, other protozoa, and organic matter. And as they do that, they release plant available nutrients. They're responsible for mineralizing nitrogen in agricultural soils, and they also are a food source for other soil microorganisms. So also very active in the soil. So now we're going to talk about, all right, so like protozoa, nematodes are important in releasing nutrients in plant available form. They help distribute bacteria and fungi through the soil by carrying microbes on their surfaces and in their digestive systems. So they're useful indicators of soil quality since their populations are impacted by all land management practices. And they enhance the soil by regulating the populations of other soil organisms and consuming disease-causing organisms. So there's a beautiful piece of fungal hyphae right next to this nematode. So they are our friend. Okay, so pausing that. There we go, microarthropods. All right, so 400 times magnification, looking at this guy, they are fundamental to the creation of humus and the formation of soil. They contribute to a healthy soil ecology, especially helping with, as you can see here, the decomposition of soil organic matter into a form that bacteria can consume. They contribute to nutrient cycling in the soil and also help suppress plant pests. So they actually increase nitrogen in the soil by digesting microbes and organic matter. So I love this guy. He's going to wave at us in a minute. Hi. Okay, so those are our various types of, we talked about the trophic levels of microbes that are in the soil. Okay, so here you can see there's some nematodes there. See if you can find any microarthropods in this little sample here. These are worm castings. And the reason I'm crazy about worm castings is there is so much microbial life and aggregate structure, and there's a, you can see the microarthropod, which helps when you're applying it to soil or around plants, which we'll talk about, has been really helpful in all of our, just checking how much time I've got left. Okay, I'm doing good. In all of our building up of nutrients in the soil. Okay, so let's see if I can go to the next one. This is funny. Here's just a difference between a potworm. This is a baby potworm that you wouldn't even be able to see, and you can tell the difference in size with these nematodes that are also in the frame there. Very efficient decomposers, as are worms. So basically, soil biology is key to building the soil carbon and the land health. They make nutrients plant available, they capture atmospheric nitrogen, they trigger support immune systems to fight off pests and diseases, they hold nutrients in the soil, and then, of course, as we talked about, the plant roots exuding the glues that build the soil structure and hold the bacteria in place. And they also improve the composting process. So all the things that the life in the soil does to our benefit. Here's another thing that's available. It's not a book, it's a reading, Adding's Biology, which is available online as a PDF, again, for Dr. Ingham, who talks about the only way to get things back in balance is to introduce the full spectrum of beneficial bacteria in biology back into our growing systems. And so we do that with compost, and I'm going to give you a compost lesson, whether you like it or not, worm castings and compost teas. So here are different ways to build up that soil food web: adding organic matter, inoculating with beneficial microbes, having a diverse plant community, and supporting habitat for natural predators, and rotating the crops, making sure you have good airflow and drainage. Companion planting, here's a great book if you are interested in more information on that. Again, this video will be available, so you can go back and reference any of these examples that I'm giving you. Crop rotations, so that you change what you're growing and mixing up and diversifying the minerals and nutrients that are being taken up and are deposited. So for example, if you do a leafy green, nitrogen fixing, that will add nitrogen back to the soil, which is pretty important after something like when you're planting brassicas, which tend to take all the nitrogen out of soil. Anyway, that's all. I could go on about crop rotation, but I think we're going to focus first on composting. And Elliot Coleman, a hero of mine who has a great book on 4-season gardening in Maine, which he does, he talks about compost being really the solution on our farms. And here's some benefits of composting, which I'm not going to read. You can read in your own time. But I did want to talk a little bit about what makes up compost. And it's really 4 things: the wet material, the brown material, air, and water, not to be forgotten. When you are, and I hope everyone here, if you're not composting already, will want to get into composting. And these are basic principles of composting, where you have a combination. What you want to do is make a sweet spot of carbon, nitrogen, 25 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So if you want to look for materials that are high in carbon, take a look at this: wood chips, 400 to 1. That's why they say if you put wood chips on a garden, it will tend to draw the nitrogen out of to break down that carbon. And so that's a long way of saying it's very carbon rich, and just keep that in mind. And you can see here leaves are 60 to 1. You think that would be more. Wood ash you'd think would be quite carbon rich, but it's actually 25 to 1. And in fact, it will add potassium, but it will also increase the alkalinity of your soil. So with all of this, you do want to do a soil test to find out what you are lacking. But adding compost to any garden will only benefit the garden, mainly because it will increase the organic matter and also give food for the microorganisms to be able to break it down further and have those nutrients available to your plants. So here's some high nitrogen materials, so you can sort of play with that. And I'm going to give you a quick example of what that looks like when you combine to make we'll start with thermophilic. Remember I talked about carbon nitrogen ratio. If you have too much carbon, excess carbon, you're going to slow down decomposition. Well, then more nitrogen is great. Well, too much of a good thing, you'll end up with a stinky pile. So you do not want to make sure that all you're putting in there are wet food, because, and I've got a great example to show you. Okay, so here's different composting methods. We're going to talk about each one: thermophilic, cold, static, and worm composting. Okay, so the thermophilic is really, you can do a lot in, especially if you have the right materials, in a short amount of time. It kills weeds and pathogens, but it's labor intensive, can kill off the beneficial microbes, and then you have to wait up to 6 months for them to come back, just because of the heat. So we went to the farm, to Dr. Ingham's farm in California, and we made compost. And so she does this 20 bucket method to teach how to do proper compost. Only 2 of those 20 buckets are high nitrogen. In this case, we used manure. And then 6 of those buckets were green materials, and 12 of the buckets, I was shocked how much woody material. And you've got everything there from wood chips to cardboard to shredded paper. And the method is you soak them all, you add them to this screen, into this bin that we've created. And you can see there, she's adding water as we go. And then finally, this is what you end up with. Now, what you have to do is start measuring the temperature. And if it's done correctly, thermophilic compost should reach 131 degrees, maintain that. I'm going to babble on here. Has to maintain 131 degrees for 15 days. You got to turn it 5 times to make it certified thermophilic. The reason you want that high temperature is you want to kill the pathogens and you want to kill the weed seeds. And you also want to take what's on the outside of the pile, which hasn't reached that temperature, and put it in the center of the pile. So there's a lot of mixing up. You want to smell it, make sure it doesn't smell acidic. Oh my, it's a lot of work. You want to turn it after 3 to 4 days. And here we are turning it and putting it back. And then you want to spread it out, let it sit there for 6 months to cool and have the microbes come back to break down the rest of the organic matter. Okay, so that is thermophilic compost. So now we're at the farm in Bridgeport, Reservoir Community Farm, and we are doing this. And what we ended up using was donated spent hops. At that time, I wasn't aware that the nitrogen ratio of spent hops is 12:1, which you can imagine from that earlier chart is really high nitrogen. So here we came back the day after we made the pile, and oh, what a smell. So we had to turn the pile right away, put the outside on the inside, put it back together, and it was exhausting. Oh, I'm giving it away. The next morning is Sunday morning. I thought, gee, that heated up really quickly. That was like 160 degrees. So I went and put the thermometer in. There was 178 degrees. Oh my. So I had to take the whole thing apart. It was a stinky mess. And this is not what you want to have happen here, because as it's degassing, it's off-gassing the nitrates. So that's, as Steve Solomon will tell us, the last thing you want. So we learned our lesson and moved on to static pile composting, which is much easier to do, although it won't kill any pathogens. So you have to be careful what you put in there. And it also won't kill weed seeds. But here's a simple recipe: 50% green, 50% woody, and then just layer it like a lasagna, if you will. Remember, I've got watering well, and you want to add soil. Here's another example: soil in there, wood chips, food scraps. But you can see you really want to mix it up. You're not just going to put your vegetable scraps in there and think that's a great thing. So once you do that, you might say, oh, I've got some leaves around here. Let's add those. I've got some fire ash. put that in there and then layer it up, and that is your static compost pile, which looks, in fact, I think this is pretty much what I've got. And it does take, what I end up doing is through the year, I'll put all of the scraps in here. They'll slowly, 80% of it will disappear. And then in the spring, out comes what I call the black gold. And I'll start putting that on the garden beds to prep them. Worm composting, on the other hand, is a little different. It's where you're using worms to recycle food scraps. And then you're going to end up with vermicompost or worm compost. They eat the food scraps, and that becomes compost as it passes through the worm's body. So just a quick example of how many nutrients you will find in worm castings. So it's really a great source of nutrients. It's also got great cation exchange capacity and really high organic matter. So I love this picture here. This is the worm bins they have at a prison in New Zealand. There's all sorts of different worm bins you can use, but they're going full scale at this particular site. Here's stackable worm bins. This is a flow-through worm bin. I don't have time to explain it, each one, but you can look it up online. Worm farms, we went to Cuba with a food delegation. We visited 12 farms. Every single farm we visited, their only source of input was worm compost. And so they've really gone, because they don't have access to chemicals. And so growing amazing food and also very healthy. So this is some things that you can feed your worms. I'm going really quickly through this. Some things you can't and can. And the difference between worm castings and thermophilic compost. I'm just looking at how much time I got left. All right. So, so I'm a big believer in worm castings. I can do it on a small scale. A lot of my food scraps will go in there, as well as leaf mulch and various other things. And again, you want to make sure you keep that 25-to-1 carbon nitrogen ratio. You'll find there's higher nutrient concentrations, lower salt levels with this. You get, as you could see, the diverse microbial population. So from that compost, I should tell you that we really wanted to make this so you could make a compost tea from the worm castings and use it up to the day of harvest. So we ended up writing regulations for organic certified worm castings and organic certified compost tea. And the main thing to keep in mind if you want to do this is you want to have vegetative inputs only. So that will allow you to not have any pathogens in your system. So what is compost tea? Well, it's the result of aerobically brewing compost in water with added amendments, and that gives you a highly nutritious food source. So here is some compost tea that we're looking at here, that you can do an extract as well. So you could take your compost or your worm castings, submerge them in some water or massage them in a cheesecloth or whatever you want to use. The microbes will be released, and that you can use as a watering in of your plants. This is Dr. Ingham demonstrating that. So here, this is explaining it a little bit more. When you're doing a compost tea, you're adding amendments and you're also adding air. So let's take a look at that. This is the compost tea brewing at home in a 5-gallon bucket. You can do it. Some aquarium bubblers. It's held down by rocks with a stick with a cheesecloth. So there is a way to make compost tea at home. And in fact, this is what we ended up doing. This is what we started with. It was an abandoned strip mall. It was empty for 25 years. We put in 132 by 4-foot garden beds, filled it with garden soil, but then we had no money left for any kind of nutrients. So we started brewing compost tea in these 50-gallon drums. And it was amazing, the results that we had. And what we were actually doing was inoculating this sterile soil with beneficial microbes. Of course, we planted right away, so they had the plants to start that symbiotic relationship, and that changed my life. That's why I decided to focus on worm composting, compost tea, and teach it as much as I can to people. And then of course the microscopy piece, being able to see what that looks like. So then we got professional, and these are the cone shape, so that I haven't even started talking about anaerobic microbes. I'm not going to do that today. That's a whole other talk. But just know that you want to keep this oxygenated so that the beneficial microbes that need aeration will survive. So some of the benefits, you're going to have water retention in soil increased. You're going to have the plants being able to take up those nutrients because those microbes have plant available nutrients, and they're going to give them to the plants. You can increase the rooting depth of plants. And of course, you won't need to use chemical-based fertilizers or pesticides or anything like that. All right, so I'm going to show you what compost tea brewing is like. So here's a short video.
All right, so we're going to make some compost tea. This brew is going to be for Gilbertis. All right, so let's mix our solution. The first thing it calls for is a cup of liquid kelp. So give it a little shake. And a good way to remember the ratio between kelp and fish is 1 to 4. So if that was a cup of kelp, this will be a 1/4 cup of the fish. So when I use the humic acid, it's really as a little bit of an extra shot. The worm castings themselves have a lot of humic acid in them, and you can tell by how dark it is, cocoa color. And this will be good to add to the 50 gallons of water that are bubbling away at Gilbertis.
Hi, good morning. My name is Joe Gloria. I'm here at Gilbertis Herb Gardens, and we are brewing compost tea, as we do every Saturday. Saturday morning, if you come in, you can bring a gallon, or we have gallons here, and you can use the most wonderful product on your vegetables, flowers, houseplants, anything, as long as you use it up quickly, because soon afterwards, the power of the tea starts to decline. So you want to use it as fast as you get it. That's the best way to do it. And we're here every Saturday, Sunday, so you can take and get what you need from us. And first thing we're doing is we're putting in our hydrolysate. And that's where the magic begins. We put this in, we let it go a little bit, and then we add, of course, the worm castings to this brew. And tomorrow, voila, compost worm tea, which is the best thing for all your plants.
Okay. So that is compost tea brewing at a large scale. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint or my slideshow now. So with compost tea, as I mentioned, you want to use vegetative inputs only. And these are those products that I talked about. The reason we're doing these products instead of a simple sugar, which is what we used to do, molasses and things like that, is molasses is really great as a bacterial food. In fact, the bacteria love it so much they multiply too much and use up the oxygen in the water, which is not what you want. So by using these products, the liquid kelp is a bacterial and fungal food, and the fish hydrolysate, not emulsion, but hydrolysate, I would prefer, is really good as a fungal food only. And humic acid, putting that in will help dissipate any chlorine that might be in the water before you put your worm castings with all of the beneficial microbes in there. You want to make sure you neutralize the chlorine. You can spray it, again, you want to spray it as soon as possible because it's aerated, it's full of microbes that need oxygen to breathe. And you use it as a foliar spray and also as a root drench. And here's an apple tree at that urban farm you saw in Bridgeport, a Reservoir Community Farm. And this, we sprayed every 3 weeks, and amazing results we had on that. Okay, so I still want to show you, because this is in the Berkshires, and I do hope you will go and visit this wonderful place. Now we're going to travel 100 miles north to Egremont, Massachusetts in the Berkshires. This is April Hill, run by Greenagers, a nonprofit working with young people doing green jobs. That's Justin Torrico in the field in March, and here we are a few months later. Look at the development and the gardens that have been created, planted, and are now maintained by young people. And what are they using for fertilizer? Compost tea. Here's Mac to tell us more.
So right here we have our small scale compost tea brewer, and we're using this right now to kind of introduce the farm to the idea of brewing compost teas. And it's something that is beginning to gain footholds in the larger agriculture industries, as well as has great benefits for small home gardeners as well. This right here is the brewer, and this is a 7-gallon brewer, which would be an applicable size for a backyard garden. So the reason for brewing a compost tea is that it inoculates your soil and your plants with beneficial bacteria and microbes. You can take this from this scale all the way up to large agriculture with huge 100 to 800 gallon brewers, and the concept stays the same.
All right, it's now 24 hours after brew. In the 7-gallon brewer, we can see the bag has castings in it still, although it feels rather gritty. All of the nice texture of the worm castings are gone. That now is in the liquid. The microbes have been feeding off of the amendments and multiplying now by the billions. So we'll take a look at that under the microscope.
This is Mac, farm apprentice at Greenagers. We're at 100 times magnification. This is a tea I brewed using our normal recipe and adding crab shell. We're looking at a spore that has germinated into fungal hyphae. This tea has very good aggregate structure, pretty small amount of fungal activity, but not minimal. And yeah, I'd say this tea was a success.
All right, so we brought it outside and raised it up so it'll be easy to fill up this bucket. Edward, could you just lift up what's inside there? So you can see that is 400 micron. They actually use it as a paint strainer, and it fits perfectly on a 5-gallon bucket and is exactly the right mesh size, 400 microns, to allow microbes to go through but hold any sediment so it doesn't clog your sprayer or whatever you're using. All right, shall we fill up the bucket?
Yep.
I'm going to turn on the valve.
Okay. So you can see the sediment collecting in the paint strainer while it fills the bucket. All right, so now we're going to fill the watering can. We placed it strategically in a garden bed, so when Edward fills it, if anything spills, nothing goes to waste. So you might be filling a backpack sprayer, which I like to use, or just a hand sprayer, or have a fancy tractor with a sprayer. Whatever you do is fine. This fine mesh watering can should work great.
Cool.
Okay, should we start with this garden bed here and give it some water?
Yeah, sure.
It's already had some tea, but let's keep going.
Edward is now watering in the seedlings that were transplanted last week. These are some beautiful tomatoes. And in fact, these particular tomatoes, if we look a week earlier, Ada is taking the transplants and submerging them in compost tea from that week's brew and potting them up. And again, applying those nutrients right around the roots of the transplanted seedlings.
Yeah, these are going to our front lawn food bed program, which is where we install a 4x8 raised bed in people's front yards. We sell one bed, and then we donate one bed to a family that requests one. And yeah, depending on the time of season, it gets filled with different seedlings, and this is a mixture of different ones. Lettuce, parsley, chives. We've got cauliflower, chard, broccoli, peppers, tomatoes.
Here we have Justin Torrico. He is watering in the seedlings that are getting ready to go into the field. And again, adding those nutrients and beneficial microbes right to these small seedlings so that that symbiotic relationship between the plant roots and the microbes can start early on. This is a great way to inoculate the soil and really give those seedlings an excellent start.
Oh yeah, the compost tea is it's nice to use it because anything that seems like it's stagnated in growth, it's looking like it's starting to turn the wrong direction. Get some compost tea, come back 2 days later, it's looking great. I love things like that. There is no magic potion, but certainly there are ones that help.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed that tour of Greenagers, April Hill. I will continue with my PowerPoint here. Awesome. So just wanted to show you, I'm always doing test trials. It's just something I do. So here's an example of a test trial we did at the farm in Bridgeport. I just had some compost tea left over, so I sprayed one bed and not the other. This is purslane growing here, which we love to grow, so we didn't pull those out. But literally the plants, the peppers and the eggplant were double the size in just 5 days later. So that was an interesting test. And again, anytime we are adding worm castings, I'll do it to one side and not the other, and have had amazing results every time. It really is like a wonder drug, if you will. And then I'm thinking, how long can you use these worm castings? How long can you store them? So I did this little test where I took 4-month-old castings and then new castings. And of course, this is our control, doesn't even compare. Well, the 4-month-old castings actually did better than a little bit better than the new castings. And what we're finding is if you store them correctly so that you allow oxygen exchange, but don't let them dry out, worm castings, actually those microbes just keep working through the organic matter that's left and become more and more pure with more and more plant available nutrients. And they're now saying up to 3 years, if they're stored correctly, you can keep worm castings. Here's another little sample I did. I just took 2 pots, exactly the same, one with chemical fertilizer, one with worm castings. You could use compost instead, added the same amount of seeds. And then here you have, I think it's 3 weeks later, only 10% worm castings. Look, the color's changing. This was sort of chewy and small. These were crunchy and sweet. And then June 22nd, the writing was on the wall. These guys all started getting diseased and dying back. This thing just took over. Went out of control. We didn't know what to do with it. So that was an interesting example. And when we looked at the soil, this is what the bagged soil with the worm, with the chemical fertilizer added looked like. There's no soil structure, there's no aggregates. And then just compare that to the other side here that shows you the bagged organic soil with, and it's just, you can see so clearly the structure, the aggregates. So the bacteria are sticky. They're going to stick together with the glues from the plants and form these beautiful aggregates throughout. Okay, so let's see if it'll let me fast forward or forward to the next slide. I did a test trial, I guess now 2019, where I wanted to show the effect of worm castings and compost tea. And so these were the trials. The first thing I did was do a soil test on both. And I had already decided that the north bed was going to be for worm castings. But when I got the soil results back, test results back, the control had so much better, more nutrients in comparison. So I thought, well, that's probably good because now those worm castings and compost tea better perform. So what I did, I added 10% worm castings to my seed starting mix. And then when I transplanted, I added half a cup or a cup of castings around the roots. And again, the reason this is so crucial is that those microbes want to interact with the roots of the plant. So yes, you could cover the whole bed, but by putting them right around the roots of the plant, they're going to start that symbiotic relationship right away. Then what I did every 3 weeks, I did an application of with 2 gallons on both either on each bed. They were, I think it was 90-foot by 3-foot garden bed. So I did for the control, I still added all of those amendments, but I didn't make a tea. So I just the same amount of each amendment and applied it as a foliar spray mixed with distilled water, not chlorinated water. And did the same, of course, non-chlorinated water. And in this case, I brewed it for 24 hours as a compost tea. Is that really going to make a difference? Well, then I took a look at the harvest. Every time I harvested, I took a photo, and the most interesting thing happened. The control was smaller. I had 1.7 times the yield on the worm compost side or compost tea side, but I wasn't expecting the shelf life. So what happened in every case, because I would save these tomatoes to make sauce, is the control ended up being bruised and damp and got diseased, and I couldn't use any of the tomatoes. So here we are, as we're going through the different days of the harvest. You can see the quality, the look, the amount of yield each time. Quite staggering. And then we expected a frost. So October 4th, I harvested everything. And then it took me a while, 15 days later, to get around to making sauce. Again, I had to throw out all of the control tomatoes. Again, exactly the same treatment. And that was something really unexpected. So basically, all life depends on soil. And there can be no life without soil, and no soil without life. They have evolved together. And I will agree. Okay.
Thank you for all of that. And thanks everyone for your questions as they came in. I think now is a great opportunity to switch right over into some of those questions. As we were just talking about compost tea, could you explain a little bit of the difference between what compost tea is and what maybe leachate is, or what a compost extraction might be, the way that they're different and that sort of thing?
Sure. All right. Well, it's funny you should mention that. We were selling these stackable worm bins, and there is in there a description of how to make worm castings. And on this particular stackable bin, there is a spout. And according to the directions, that's where the compost tea comes out. No, that's not where the compost tea comes out. That is what we call leachate. And I should have included a video of all these bad boy microbes that exist, because what's happened is it's an indication that your compost is too wet. And you've probably added way too many vegetable scraps and not enough carbon sources. And so once you start collecting water down there, it's sitting there, it's anaerobic, and you're going to get things, well, obviously insect larvae, because you've got fruit flies that have been attracted by all of the material that hasn't been digested by worms. And so they've laid their eggs. So you're going to have those, and you're going to have ciliates, which prefer anaerobic conditions, and it's probably going to be stinky. So you do not want to use that. That is called leachate. So the compost tea that we went on and on about in this talk is where you aerobically brew, if you will. It's not really brewing, although we call it compost tea brewing. You're adding oxygen into a water source. And the water source is really a holding bin for the microbes. So the material, whether it's compost or compost tea or whatever else you want to put in there, Mac was talking about putting oyster shells in there. that will, 400 micron is the size holds you want. And you can get 400 micron bags. We used to use cheesecloth, and it was hoping that most of it would, the compost and those aggregates would stay in the bag, but because of the agitation, the microbes would go into the liquid. And then as soon as they go, there's a food source. And they've got, what I would prefer is kelp and humic acid. I told you about humic acid and that fish hydrolysate. You can use alfalfa meal. There's a lot of different food sources you can use. I think I listed in one of the slides, and they will feed off of that. But there's a time limit to sort of the sweet spot where they've consumed all of those nutrients, but now they need to have a home. And we found 24 hours, if you follow this recipe, and then you apply it as a foliar spray, the plant will take in those nutrients right away. So there's all this bacteria now that's full of the nutrients from the food that it's just eaten, sitting on the leaf. It's absorbed immediately. I can remember doing rows of pepper plants at that farm in Bridgeport. By the time I got to the end, I swear, the ones in the beginning were standing up, looking green and lush, and it's just remarkable. It's what you can get, but you don't want to let it sit there. And I've got another whole microscopy piece where I show you what happens if you don't use the compost tea right away. If you're worried or you don't have the facility to make a compost tea, you can do, and I talked about it earlier, a compost extract, where you can still take your compost or your worm castings, put it in, if you don't have anything, put it in cheesecloth, massage it a little bit. Those microbes will be released into the liquid, and apply that to your garden. So that is the difference between those three. That was a mouthful.
Great, thank you. As well, some folks are interested in the Vermicompost, and in particular, how long do you like to, can you store? You mentioned, using your Vermicompost can store for a long time if it's stored correctly. How is it stored correctly again?
Right. I took that part out of the video because I thought it was redundant, but obviously I should have kept it in. And in fact, I had a conversation with a woman today who wants to start composting, and what we use are breathable bags, the bags they use to ship goldfish around the world, that allows oxygen exchange but holds in moisture. It's really remarkable. And Cordon makes it, Kordon. The bad news is, when I was trying to find some bags for her today, they are sold out. And then she looked and said they're sold out around the world for some reason. So you do want to have it hold in the moisture. So what I'm going to experiment with is a needle pricking a regular piece of plastic, and I'll be experimenting with that. If we can't get these breathable bags anymore, which worked amazing, and that's what we have. So what we'll do is we'll take a 12 by 20 bag, cut it open, and that lays perfectly flat on top of a 10-gallon tote. And that's how we store our worm castings. And we've had amazing results. And when I do the microscopy, everybody's still doing great in there. So that is the trick, to be able to keep the moisture in and allow oxygen exchange. So if anyone gets a source of cordon breathable bags, let me know.
Julia Latati asked if used mushrooms, the bags that you used to grow mushrooms might be able to work.
I think that allows too much oxygen exchange. What we used to use are these canvas bags, and we put in a burlap bag, and we'd come back and the thing would be half the size and dried out. And then it's not good anymore. The microbes have passed away, I'm afraid. And there's no rejuvenating it or bringing it back to life. As soon as it dries out, it becomes really rock hard. So you want to avoid that. Better to allow have air pocket between the castings and your lid, and pull the plastic that way, and then just stick a few holes in there. That's my next test, because if you can't get the breathable bags, that game's over. But I'm thinking that will work, just allowing a little bit of oxygen to get through.
And there's some questions about the inputs for the tea. And would you be able to share a recipe for a small batch compost
Right.
tea? Folks were interested in, about how much of the worm castings would you add to certain amounts of water and that sort of thing.
Remember when I was showing you those products and that was good for 50 gallons? It was a cup of kelp, quarter cup of fish hydrolysate, and a splash of humic acid. Well, if that's for 50 gallons, you would divide that by 10 for 5 gallons. So if you're doing a 5-gallon bucket, it's a certain number of, and then again, if it's 10 pounds of worm castings for 50 gallons, it would be 1 pound of worm castings for 5 gallons.
And actually it leads into a great point, because some folks are asking, what is the difference between fish hydrolysate and fish emulsion? Why is hydrolysate preferred over emulsion?
Hydrolysate is a cold process so that a lot of the nutrients aren't burned off as they are with emulsion. The other thing with hydrolysate, they keep everything, including the oil, which is essential. So it's a much fuller, richer in nutrients, and a better product, better process on treating the fish, so that the end product is better.
Some folks are talking about making their own vermicompost. Could you recommend what type of worm, and folks that might be able to provide worms for vermicompost?
Right, there's a real shortage of worms right now. We were selling them on our website, but we are now just selling to schools, which are definitely getting into worm composting in a big way. So the worms you want to use are called red wigglers, or Eisenia fetida, and I'm going to put that in there too. I just heard Uncle Jim's worm farm is now has some back in stock, but I've also heard different reviews about the quality. So they're tough to find. I just say, just keep checking out different sources, worm farmers. But I think so many of us are getting into worm farming right now. The one thing we'd like to do is expand on is focus on propagating those worms. Here's a trick. If you are starting worm composting, feed them certified organic cornmeal. Apparently cornmeal is really good in increasing the productivity or the numbers of worms that you have in your worm bin.
Someone asked another really good question. Can you use any compost to make this compost tea? They asked about using cold compost versus hot compost. What do you recommend for the compost input part of the compost tea?
Well, the reason I use the worm castings is because, all those pictures we showed you with all that life in the compost, that's because it's worm castings. And thermophilic is okay, but remember, because it's reached that high temperature, the microbes have been killed off, except for bacteria. And so you have to make sure it's sitting around for the microbes to recolonize. The best thing to do is to take a look under the microscope and see how your compost is. But my suggestion is, if you are using a compost, you might want to double the amount. So for worm castings, if I'm using 1 pound for a 5-gallon bucket, you might want to use 2 pounds of compost for that 5-gallon bucket. The other thing we've done, which I didn't have a chance to talk about, is we've taken soil. I showed you that bacterial shot. No, sorry, the fungal shot where we had a high fungal population in the soil. So what we did is we took that high fungal compost, and we took this high fungal soil and added it to our compost tea brewing, and then we had all this fungi in the compost tea, and that's really a good way to bring up the fungal population of your compost tea. So there are different things you can add to your compost. The other really cool trick, steel cut oats is great fungal food. So you can take some compost or worm castings, add some steel cut oats, let it sit there for 2 weeks, and then you're going to have this beautiful film of fungi. Then you're going to add that as one of your inputs with mix that in with your regular compost or worm castings, and you're going to have a nice fungal tea. So if you're spraying your fruit trees, if you've got strawberries, if you've got any perennials that you want to that need a higher fungal to bacterial ratio, those are ways you can introduce more fungal.
Another question came in about how often do you apply your compost tea throughout the season, and do you dilute it?
I never dilute it, but I do know people who do. Generally, when lawn companies use it, they'll dilute it. I think I've gone to so much trouble to get the ratios right that I know that the microbes are at the right consistency to really do well. I don't want to mess with it. And so I do, that's why I wanted to include that you can go to any hardware store and ask for a paint strainer. And funny enough, they make it 400 microns, which is exactly what you want. And so put your finished compost tea through that. So anytime you're going to be straining it, all that excess, if there is any film or material that got out, it will be held in that strainer so that you won't clog up your sprayer. Or I use a backpack sprayer and again, foliar spray, and then around the roots, anywhere that the plant can take it in. So don't just spray the whole bed, focus on around the root zone of whatever you're spraying. If you're doing a fruit tree, you'll want to spray the leaves of the tree and then take, not right around the trunk, take the, what do you call that? Where the canopy ends, the root zone, and spray that.
I'd like to talk some about some of the things that we see as gardeners, as farmers, about soil health that we can just see without going into looking in the microscope. What are some of those on-farm soil health indicators that we can, get our hands on and observe with our own eyes?
Well, if you see bare soil, you know you're in trouble. You do not want to see bare soil, as I pointed out earlier. So things that you will want to see: diversity, as much diversity as possible. So don't be afraid to say, I have a little space here. I'm going to interplant with some little herbs, and then I'm going to be, I know those carrots are coming out, so I'm going to put my tomato here, and companion planting, as we talked about. So diversity to me is the key. Pollinators right around plants that need vegetables that need to be pollinated makes a lot of sense. So if you have any standing water, that is a bad sign. So you don't want to have any area that is oversaturated. There are a lot of plants you can put in that love wet feet. I'm thinking of cardinal flower, for example, Lobelia cardinalis, I think it is. It's a beautiful native. It'll draw the hummingbirds, and it will take care of those wet places. So the right plant in the right place. And what I'm working on more and more is introducing more perennials in my garden. So this past year, I started a large artichoke patch, not artichoke, oh, I wish. I'm trying to find artichoke seeds. I was going to start them really early. Anyway, asparagus patch, strawberries, good King Henry perennial spinach is another one. So that kind of use of perennial plants, and more looking at permaculture for answers, where you would take an overstory tree and do understory planting. There are words like silvopasture and a number of other techniques that are becoming more and more popular in regenerative agriculture. So healthy to me is where you see a lot of different things going on. Things seem to complement each other. You have different bloom times, different harvest times. You do succession planting so that when one crop is finishing, you're going to be ready with the next crop. So having a good crop plan in place, so you're planning ahead. And again, you might be planting basil and then, or lettuce, for example, and then 2 weeks later, you'll put some more seeds in because you're going to be harvesting the lettuce, and that'll allow the new seeds to fill in. So that's called succession planting. All of these tricks to having a healthy garden.
Crystal asked, weeded their garden, so there's no plants, and it's not covered, and is worried how long will it take for those microorganisms to begin to die off.
Remember we used to think, let's clean up the garden for fall. No, keep everything. If you are going to cut it, just let it lie, and that'll be a wonderful way to cover the soil with the debris from whatever's grown there before. Even weeds, I tend to cut them, and if there's weed seeds, I'll get rid of that. But generally, try not to disturb the soil. So if you are with bare soil, I would suggest seeing if you can find some leaf mulch somewhere. It's probably a great time of year to get leaves that have started to decompose and put that on your garden, or get some excellent compost and put 2 to 3 inches of compost down and start planting soon, right? How warm was it today? It really got me inspired. But yeah, it's never too late to start doing the right thing. That's my theory. And once you start covering the soil, once you start planting and you have compost in there, the microbes are going to come and they're going to start working with your plants. Nature wants to succeed. What we want to do is help nature succeed.
Have you ever used the Slake test as a soil health indicator?
Not yet, no, but that's a really good carbon proxy test. Doug, you want to talk about that? Because I know NOFA Mass offers carbon proxy testing.
I know a little bit about it, but I might actually ask Laura Davis.
Oh, Laura's here? Excellent.
Laura, if you mind being put on the spot.
Hi, Doug. Hi, Monique. So the NRCS does the Slake test a lot, and we do it in the carbon proxy testing, where you take a clump of soil from your field edge and put it in a little basket on a ball jar that has water in it. And then you take a clump of soil from a tilled area of your garden, and you put that in a different jar. And you can watch how the aggregate either stays together or falls apart in the water. It just gives you an indication of your how your soil is aggregated, and you won't get erosion if you have that nice aggregation in your soil. And it also is a proxy for the amount of carbon in your soil. You can find it at the NRCS or on the NOFA Mass website.
Thank you. Yeah, when I learned about the Slake test, I thought, wow, that's a great one that everyone can do at home.
Right. Just know how much, and if it's falling apart, then imagine any water event, any nutrients that you try to put there are not going to be held in the soil.
Great. As well, there's a couple more sort of specific questions about the equipment to use. Someone asked about, where should we go for these bubblers? Because it's true that these aquarium style bubblers are great, and they're efficient, but they don't always last so long. So can you recommend some good aerators?
Right. Well, what we ended up doing, my son is a mechanical engineer, so he came up with the design of the cone, and he just got a pump and he figured out, as an engineer would, the amount of pressure required to push the air through. And I think I don't want to say it's on our website, but I can send that to you. The ratio of, depending on how large your tank is, how much wattage air you want to push through there. So there is a formula for that. But you can see our evolution, that 5-gallon bucket in the kitchen, blowing air. I mean, those aquarium, I got them at the pet store, those aquarium pumps, and they lasted for quite a while. But the problem is, when you have anything cylindrical, those anaerobic microbes are going to hang out around the edge. The other thing to think about, most important thing, is if you don't clean your brewer or your bucket right away, you get what's called a biofilm, and it will stick to the edges, and that's where the anaerobic microbes are going to hang out. so that when you use it again, it's going to go anaerobic really quickly. So you not only have to clean the bucket, but you also have to clean the hoses. So if you are going to purchase a professional compost tea brewer, just make sure you don't get one that has, and I've seen them that have hoses all around, because each one of them will be a wonderful place to harness or to house the biofilm. So this is all in that compost tea talk, isn't it?
Yeah.
I tried to cover too much.
Watkins made an excellent point in the chat saying to make sure you have check valves on your aquarium air pumps and to keep them higher than the bucket or a tank that you're brewing in case there's any, water that might flow back up. It won't go into the pump itself.
Right. Or don't do what I did the first time I tried it. I took because I was used to building ponds. So I took the pump and I put it in the water and it just didn't work. And I'm plugged in, I'm reading the instructions while I'm doing it. If this gets submerged in water, do not reach in. And I'm like, oh, just so don't put the pump in the water. This is not a pond that you're creating. This is, the pump should be on the outside. And make sure you have enough space so when it bubbles, it doesn't bubble over either. That's another little tidbit of experience there.
Here's a question from Gwen about their worms. It says here, I went to feed my worms and it seems like there's some leachate at the bottom and it's a little stinky. Should I start over?
Oh, I hate that. That's happened to me. And my suggestion would be start a new bin. I'm assuming you just put it into a 10-gallon tote or something. It's just sitting there. And that's really hard because you have no, I hate to say it, wiggle room, because if it gets too moist, there's nowhere for the water to go. So if you are creating them yourself, get 2 totes and the one on top drill holes in so that if it does get too wet, it won't be sitting in water. Because once it does that, it's pretty much anaerobic and you don't want to use it. The only choice you have is maybe build a new one, as I'm describing, and fish out your worms and put it in the new bedding. But what you have left there, if it's stinky, you don't want to use it because it's not going to be healthy for your plants.
And this might be the last question for tonight. What is the best way to separate worms from castings?
Okay, so if you have a stackable bin or a flow-through bin, obviously you feed on the top and you harvest on the bottom. Worms want to live in that top 3 to 4 inches of your material, your worm bin. If you are in a bin situation where you don't have a top or a bottom, you're just feeding from the top and you have to harvest from the top, feed one side, wait a couple of weeks. The worms will migrate over to that side. And then you can start, maybe still scrape off a little bit, but you can harvest from that other side. And then flatten it out and then let it fill up again. So that's a trick. Other people will just throw their worm compost down and have a flashlight and knowing that the worms will keep going down and then they just keep taking from the surface because the worms will go away from the light. I haven't tried that myself.
Yeah, I've tried that, piling it in a pyramid or cone shape, and then they all like migrate to the center and you can keep stripping away, the upper layer and you end up with a somewhat condensed pile of worms.
Cool.
Yeah, great. Well, we're right at almost 8:30 and I want to respect all of our time. Sorry we didn't get to all your questions, but we obviously have some more events that we can, keep the conversation going. So thank you very much, Monique, for all that great insight and information. Thank you all again for your great questions. We hope you found this meeting informative and we'd love your feedback. We want to again remember to thank all of our NOFA Mass members who've made this event possible, and please consider making a small donation or becoming a member to help keep our work going. As well, we want to thank again our sponsors, Chelsea Green, Ward's Nursery, and Neptune's Harvest. We couldn't do it without their support. So when you do support them, remember to say how much you appreciate their support of NOFA Mass. Next week, we'll be hosting Marco Thomas and Laura Davis, who will be helping us learn more about choosing mineral and biological amendments. So we'll go over a little bit about soil testing, interpreting soil tests from various labs, and then really getting into how to mineral balance some of our soils based on those tests, as well as using some of the knowledge that we've gained here tonight, the different options, including compost tea and Korean natural farming indigenous microorganisms as biological amendments for your soil. We will have live Spanish interpretation available for next week's event. From everyone in NOFA Mass, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time.